Hey, what is up, everyone? Listen, some of you guys are like, what's going on? You know this gentleman, many of you do. This is Kirkland, pastor of Revive City Church. And so, man, we've been best friends for how long? We've been best friends for?
23 years.
23 years. One thing we always know is this: when we get together on the basketball court, I'd always take it to you. And so I kind of got you a gift as we get started this morning here in a moment. I wanted to bless you with a gift, man, because I'm a giver and I love you. And you don't even know what's in the box. It could even I could be okie dokie.
You want me to open it now?
Open it right now. Let everybody just see your face, man. I want to see the gift.
And thank you, Revive, for allowing this conversation to happen. We're here in Huber Heights and on Engaged City Church ground. And so, oh my goodness. For real?
For real, man. Yeah.
For real?
No jokes, man. No jokes,
oh
dude.
my goodness.
No jokes right here.
These are limited edition right here.
Those are slick, man.
Thank
and
you,
again,
man.
Gift from my brother. I love you. Man, we have grown up together. So we've been through a lot. I can honestly say I wouldn't be where I am today without you. And even talking about this moment, and we're talking about, what's taking place in our country right now with the murder of Mr. George Floyd. I always go back to you, and we always have conversations because you help me gain understanding and wisdom, and I filtered things through you. And so I think this, and not I think, I know this is a conversation that doesn't just need to happen in situations like this. It needs to be a continual out front conversation, and I'm committed to do that. And I know that's your heart too. So to be able to continue to unify, as you would say as well. And so with that said, we're going to have some good discussions, man, to really address some things with churches today and pastors and Christians and just our world overall. So with that said, how do you want to?
Well, and I just want to frame up this conversation because you have to understand that we're going to take heat. And Pastor Doug's going to take a certain type of heat, and I'm going to take another type of heat. And I appreciate that you're willing to take that heat because you don't do things to please people. You do things to please Christ. And so I just want to appreciate you because we are in a world and we're in a climate that some church leaders have chosen to back away and distance themselves. And I don't see that from Engaged City Church. And then our church knows that that's not our posture, that we pursue what God fights for. And so when people are crying for justice, I feel like they're crying to our God.
Yeah.
And I think God has appointed us as his ministers to speak on behalf of what he has already revealed. And I know that we both pastor multi-ethnic churches. So my church may not realize this about your church, is that Pastor Doug's a white pastor, but he has a lot of black people in his church. And I'm a black pastor, and I have a lot of white people in our church. And I think that in this multi-ethnic movement, which we're in a very small minority of churches that would consider themselves multi-ethnic, that we can have people who are sitting right next to each other, hug each other, love each other, break bread with one another, worship, use the same worship music, use the same Bible, hear the same message, say amen to the same points. But yet when we come into culture and we come into spaces of what's happening in the world, like what we witnessed 2 weeks ago, you can have two people who sit next to each other who don't understand each other.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you. I have some fear and some frustration, and I even have hesitation having conversations like this. And I'm going to tell you why. And I don't feel that from you because we have 23 years of experience. But I feel like there could be people even in my congregation or who are connected to our church who like us on Facebook. But I'm going to be honest that my fear is that they would hear this conversation and I would put myself out there. I would tell you my experiences. I would tell you my point of view. I would tell you my story. And then it would be rejected.
Yeah.
It would be dismissed. It would be, oh, you're just playing a victim. Oh, you're just playing the race card. Oh, you're just a race baiter. You're creating a false narrative. You're listening to someone else blindly and you're perpetuating falsehoods. And I don't know if there's anything else in life more frustrating is to tell you I'm telling you the truth and not to be believed.
Yeah.
And that's some of my fear and some of my frustration. And I just want to lead out, not as a know-it-all or an expert, but I just want to lead with that's where my weakness is and my vulnerability. And I think a lot of our problem is we're not willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate you being vulnerable with me here today. And I don't know, do you have any frustrations or
Yeah, no,
concerns?
I mean, and I'm with you. I think it's always, in these moments, what do you say? What can you do? And so for me, I have a fear of unintentionally or unknowingly saying the wrong thing and not meaning to, and not being able to be given grace because I'm trying. Where I think a lot of individuals may freeze up in these moments, not knowing what to say or do, and therefore they do nothing. And so silence. And so I don't want to be silent, but I also want to do things wisely, knowing this, no matter what we say or do, somebody's going to always misinterpret or, because everybody's got a different context and the content, to their life. And so I understand that, and I do my best to be respectful of that, knowing that not everybody's going to be pleased with these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I've had different conversations from, both sides,
Mm-hmm.
both perspectives in a situation like this. So I'm secure enough in my faith and my relationship with Christ to be able to be open to say what I feel, how I feel, and be able to stand, with my brothers and sisters, no matter what. And so for me, I just do my best to know that we're lucky to have access to the gospel, and therefore we have to make sure that we keep that in the back of our mind as we interact with different individuals and to gain perspective and have conversations. Like, I'm not about just, let's post stuff on social media to just, that's not really a conversation. You can use it to bring awareness to things, but you can also use it to gaslight situations. So for me, being able to sit down and get perspective is everything. And so that's why I love being able to sit down with you this way. But fears, I don't want to be misinterpreted or anything like that at all. But, that's just always in the back of my mind. But
I see that. And I want to say, from my perspective, I can see where you could be even misinterpreted or your words could be twisted and used. I've seen that happen. I've seen people who want to say something and try to say something, and then someone said, well, you didn't say it the right way, or you said the wrong thing. Or I've seen you reach out to me for perspective, and I would say, yeah, say that, do that. Trying to be respectful and gain some understanding.
Yeah.
But then for you to say it, and then someone else who's a person of color say, no, you said the wrong thing. And so
I just blame you.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Kirk told me to. But,
Exactly. So what you're going to find here in these conversations is that no people group is a monolith. You can't speak for all white people. I can't speak for all black people. All we can say is, here's our experience. Here's what we see. And then here are the churches that we pastor. And here are the people who come to us. And I can see where there's a disconnect. You know what it really reminds me of? And I know you've seen this before as you pastor and you counsel couples and you do marital counseling and relationship, premarital counseling. I've seen this time and time again where you have two different people and they're in a relationship, they're in a marriage. And the one person thinks everything is good. The one person thinks it's going great.
yeah.
But then the other person wakes up one morning, looks him in the eye and says, I'm not happy. There's something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something going on here. And I've seen that situation where they come behind my desk and the one person maybe has their arms crossed like, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what we're talking about. I'm happy. I love my partner. And I'm just here because I have to be here.
Yeah.
And I've seen that other partner just be frustrated in that moment to say, you don't see what's going on. You don't experience what I experience, and you don't listen. And I think that's what we're having in the multi-ethnic church. Yeah. And I think it's a broader conversation to our nation is you have two people who are in relationship with each other in community, and we're Americans, but yet there's this disconnect. And I've seen in that counseling situation time and time again, a person who's open to listen, to hear what the other partner has to say, then gain understanding, to learn, wait a minute, maybe that partner operates with a different love language than I operate in. Yeah. That person has a different perspective. They were raised differently. Their parents said and did different things. And that person, their arms to come from being crossed to uncrossed, to sitting closer to each other, to then realizing things that they never even saw. They were doing unintentionally. They were saying unintentionally, and I've seen reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the moment that me and you are having right now.
Yeah.
And I think our churches are having as we sit next to each other, loving the same Jesus, but our experiences are so vastly different.
And I would say to that too, I think too, I've even sat down with couples where one wants to talk, but the other one knows there's a problem, but they don't want to address the problem. And so it's like they just want to ignore it.
You better preach.
And I've always said, like, you can only sweep dirt under the rug. You got kids. We both got kids, right? We got a lot of kids. Together, we got a whole bunch of kids. But what it is, if your kids just keep stuffing all their toys under the bed when it's time to clean the room, eventually there's not going to be any more space. And now they got to go and take out what's under the bed and really go through the stuff that they got to go through. And I think that's what the church has done. Even culture today is just want to keep sweeping things under the rug. And now you've got a rug in the middle of the living room that looks like it's pregnant. And now we got to address the lump, the hump in the rug. And so this is where we have to have these conversations on a continual basis to continue to filter through these things, man.
That's
and
messy.
you just can't ignore it.
That's messy.
Yeah.
You start pulling out the stuff from under the rugs. You start pulling the stuff out the closet.
Yeah.
Right? It gets dusty. It gets messy, and it's frustrating.
Yeah.
In that moment.
And I would say this too. The most dangerous thing that you and I can ever know is what we're supposed to do. Because once you know it, you can't unknow it. So now you're going to sit there under conviction, and that complacency breeds hostility. That's why you got a lot of hostile people running around, because they're not really being the church, the Christ follower that God is asking them to be to somebody. And so, that's just, I'm sorry, I shouldn't get on those rants. But
well, let me, can I go in right there?
Please.
Because this conversation we're having to the church. And I don't expect people who aren't believers to understand our worldview, where we're coming from. So when I see the church perpetuate this hiding things and putting them under the rug, I'm going to tell you that it's frustrating, because in one moment they would quote like Dr. Martin Luther King and saying, this is the way that you should express your feelings, and this is the way that you should feel. And here's a man we're going to use as an example. And I would go, if that man was alive today, I don't know that you would like him. I don't know that you would like what he had to say. But that's Martin Luther King. That's a human being like we're human beings. Nobody's perfect.
I know where you're going.
But where I'm going is,
they ain't ready.
I think if Jesus chose to have his earthly ministry today, and from what I read in the Bible that's in red, I wonder if church people, when I say church people, you know what I'm talking about.
I know.
People who would say that they're Christians, but yet they espouse ideologies, they espouse identities above their own relationship with Jesus, and their words don't match up with the Bible. The words doesn't match up with what they would say they would believe. Now, here's what I think the Word of God has to say about that. In Romans 12:9, it says, let love be without hypocrisy. And I see the church, and when I say the church, you know what I mean by that. I see a lot of hypocrisy in that we want to lift up something that looks like an American dream type Christianity that perpetuates this silence and the brushing under the rug. But then we diminish the things that Christ said, like love your neighbor and love your enemy. And so I think we're having a real talk.
100%.
Come to Jesus moment. With if we're going to say we're Christians, let's start acting like it. And let's start being about what Christ said that we're supposed to do.
And what he said, Jesus said, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all heart, soul, mind, strength. And then love your neighbor as yourself, which is just as equal. And so when Jesus said, this command I give you, this new command, which means you wasn't doing it right. Because the disciples, we know from Scripture, they were racist, right? Jews, Samaritans. And so Jesus had to teach them the way of how to do things. And I think the church today is good at just loving people who look like them, act like them, smell like them. And I think that is the problem, is that we love the Jesus that fits the box that we want and how we want him to be. And Jesus is not inside that box. Jesus has exploded out of the box. And therefore, we have to make sure we're doing it the way that he wants. And so, as we're talking about all this stuff, let's just go into it, right? Mm-hmm. Let's go into it. So we talk about, love without hypocrisy. Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. Because I know there's Christians out there who they get nervous to say, anytime you want to get into a discussion about it, they want to say all lives matter. Mm-hmm. So when you hear that, what does that do for you in this moment? Like, they don't want to just say Black Lives Matter. They want to say, well, all lives matter. What's your take on that? How can you break that down for them?
So as a Christian who happens to be black, notice how I said that. Mm-hmm. My beliefs informs my identity. Mm-hmm. As a Christian who happens to be black.
Say that again. Say it again.
Yeah, my beliefs inform my identity, not the other way around. Yep. So when I hear all lives matter, I understand the sentiment. I understand what was trying to be espoused. Mm-hmm. And I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone at Revive City Church disagrees with the statement, all lives matter. What seems to be hypocritical is the tone and the placement of that phrase.
Yes.
It usually follows Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
If you say Blue Lives Matter, which I agree, no one reports afterwards, no, all lives matter.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
If you say unborn lives matter, no one says afterwards, all lives matter. But as soon as you say Black Lives Matter, then there comes this response. And the question is, are you truly espousing equality in that statement? Or are you brushing something under the rug again?
Yeah.
And for a person who has continually experienced, shh, be quiet, don't you say anything. You sit there and be nice and comply and don't do anything. That is a victimization and that's a trauma. To say, hey, wait a minute, I have an experience and I have a frustration. Can I say something about it? It's like, no, shh, all lives matter.
Yeah.
And it just perpetuates the hurt.
Yeah.
And then you see the volatility of a moment that we saw 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. When we all, I don't care what color you are, witnessed a traumatic event. And that event is a trigger to some people who time and time again seen the worst of situations. And for you to say in that moment, all lives matter, is to say, are we even watching the same thing?
Yeah.
Are we even watching the same video? Of course, all lives matter. And because all lives matter, what just happened? What just happened?
Yeah.
And can I go in just a little bit deeper?
No.
I think what makes this particular incident frustrating for the black community is, first of all, the setting in which everything has been placed. We have been in lockdown for the past 3 months. And what have we been fed for the past 3 months? Fear.
Yeah.
We have had a constant diet of fear, of we can't go out, we can't do this. And rightfully so, we want to protect our neighbor. But that message of fear has been perpetuated. And then we see on the news a young black man running for his life, fighting for his life, shot down in the middle of the street. We see now that in a moment where the world is fearful, now we see fear again. Fear perpetuating. What's the fear now? It's not COVID-19.
Yeah.
It's the fear of blackness.
Yeah.
It's the fear, the criminality of black skin.
Yeah.
And what do they say in that moment, Pastor Doug, when they say, when you see the scene of Ahmaud Arbery falling down dead in the street? They say, wait for the facts.
Yeah.
Wait for the facts. While we were waiting for the facts, another black man is in the middle of the road with a knee on his neck and other bodies holding him down, handcuffed behind his back, hogtied, crying out for his life and crying out for his mother. And while we're waiting for the facts, we watch that man cry out, I can't breathe. And we see other people, people of different colors, people of different professions, people of different experiences. Get off of him.
Yeah.
Let him breathe. Let him up. And for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, while we're waiting for the facts, that man's life is gone. It's snubbed out. And while we're waiting for the facts, we hear about a young lady who's sleeping in her bedroom when the police come in unannounced. And her boyfriend, not knowing who it is, fires in self-protection. And then they fire back and kill that woman, an EMT, a professional, someone who would save lives. For the police just to leave and not even call 911. They had to call 911 themselves. And still today, it's just a sorry, wrong house. And the men who did that are walking around free today. I'm not necessarily saying their intention was racially motivated. I'm not saying it was even intentional, but there are laws in our country about manslaughter, but yet those men go free while we're waiting for the facts. And then the facts start to roll in. That the man, after he shoots Ahmaud Arbery, calls him a racial slur over his dead body. Yeah. And then someone says, who espouses to know Jesus, all lives matter. And I ask you, does Ahmaud Arbery's life matter? Does Breonna Taylor's life matter? Does George Floyd's life really matter? And I know someone would say, well, but what about the organization?
And I'll slide in. And what I'll say too is then what everybody then wants to do is bring up someone's past. And see, I have a problem with that because some of us, we've done some things in our past that we could have got arrested for, but we didn't, by the grace of God, right? But then there's other times we make decisions. And I've always said this, like, if as a Christ follower, regardless of what you've done in the past, I also want to focus on the present. I don't want to just, anybody can bring up the past and it makes them feel better about it. That's all irrelevant to what we witnessed in that moment. And when I was watching that for the first time, I was wanting to jump out of my skin. Like I was like, man, I started all these emotions where I was like, going, what if that was my friend right here? And like, and I'm like thinking all these different thoughts, like what would I do if I was standing there? How would I, and I would hope that I would do the right thing in that moment. And it was just like, for me, I can't even comprehend what it felt like for you, but I know what it felt like for me in that moment. And I wanted to jump through the screen. And so when people start bringing up the past, I hate when people bring up people's past because we've all got a past. And we need to keep, 100. And if we're a Christ follower, then we should understand what grace is. So bringing up the past, keep that there. We have to focus on what was in front of us. And the thing that got me the most was that he cried out for his mom and said, "Mom, I can't breathe." And his mom has already passed away. So like, it's just those things where it's like, wow. I mean, it was like I was at a loss for words. I didn't even know what to say.
Yeah.
And then we go back to, we can't say that Black lives matter. We can say unborn babies' lives matter, like you said. We can say all these other, but we can't stop. And every time somebody says Black lives matter, the qualifier is all lives matter. But I can stop and say Black lives matter. I'm with you. I'll went to the protest.
Right.
I'm with you. I love you, man. What can I do to be part of a solution? You're hurting, I'm hurting. The Bible tells us to weep with those who weep.
That's right.
Mourn with those who mourn. So I don't have to have all this understanding to come and stand with you, to say, right, I am with you. And everybody thinks they got to have all these things, crossing T's, dotting I's, and they don't. They got to come and say, I want to represent Christ. What can I do? Black lives matter.
That's right.
And so, I just think folks are so afraid to just say that, and they always want to throw the qualifier after it that way. And that's why I'd always reach out to you and say, help me understand. Help me understand. And I'm not afraid to do that. And if more people would be willing to say, help me understand, then they could get a different perspective from someone who it impacts in a different way.
Yeah, because George Floyd has similar features as my father. So I can see someone like my father underneath the knee, and someone would say, well, okay, say you can disassociate the organization Black Lives Matter from the cry Black Lives Matter, but where are the Black Lives Matter people when Black people are being killed by gang violence?
Yeah.
Where are Black Lives people when so many million children are being aborted? And I want to say to you, I'll tell you where they are. I have a funeral It seems like every single month, I'll tell you where they're crying and they're mourning and they're crying out for new ways. And I can tell you the social workers, and I can show you the church planners, and I can show you the nonprofits, and I can show you the Boys and Girls Club who are working with those gangbangers, who are working with those who've been a part of a system that has fed them no hope and no opportunity. And they're trying their very best to make a difference. And I've stood on TV when one of our men was shot and killed for walking down the street from a White Castle run, a veteran. And I want to tell you that his life mattered just the same. Yeah. But what we see here is someone who is an authoritative figure, someone who represents the guy you call when you're in trouble. And there's just something deeply traumatic and traumatizing when the good guys, and I know all cops are not bad guys. We know that. We don't even have to say that. Yeah. But what we saw in that moment was the justice scale. We saw it flipped upside down, and the person who is supposed to be the one protecting you is now the person who is victimizing you. Yeah. And so we cry against violence of all types. Yeah. And I want to tell you, Doug, if someone who looked like you was underneath the knee of that officer, I would be just as outraged. But I ask you the question, when's the last time you've seen someone who looks like you on broad daylight and their life snuffed out from them for all to see for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? Yeah. When's the last time you've seen that? Then for that person to be assassinated because of their past. Yeah. To put the burden of proof on the man who's dead. And that's what I want to tell you as we have these conversations, and it gets awkward and we're like, I didn't know there was a problem. When you have the burden of proof is on you just to be alive, just to say that I deserve the shot to be alive. It's hard. Yeah. It's difficult. And I don't know what your experience is. I don't know what it's like when you get pulled over. I can tell you some stories that happened to me. I can tell you some things that happened to me. And maybe they were isolated incidents. But how many black men have to say this happened to me when we figure out it's maybe not an isolated incident? Maybe there's something bigger. And I say, and I'm like, well, here's the stats and here's the information. Well, great, those are stats. But what about the stats of 12 million people who cry out and say consistently, this is what happens when I drive in this neighborhood. And this is what happens when I have an Aspire tag. And this is what happens. And so I just asked you that question. What's your interaction been? And do you see a disparity? Or is it because of our lack of proximity that we don't understand these issues? So my question is, how do we get understanding and how do we become empathetic?
And again, I think it happens through conversations like this. We've talked. I'm never going to fully understand what it's like to be a black man in America. But I'm willing to listen to your experiences. No one can ever rob you of an experience. What you've experienced, and we talk about PTSD, right? Mm. And so, I know it's tied to military for the most part with what they've been through, and we appreciate our military that way. But there's also situations that other individuals have been through that cause them to carry some of these feelings through all these years, and so it's going to eventually cause them to react in situations, and rightfully so, with really studying the history of what has taken place, and the prejudice and just seeing.
Okay, go ahead. So you said history. Mm-hmm. So do you think maybe that's a starting place to talk about history? Yeah. Is there actually a place in the space for that? Is that really relevant? Because I would hear some people who would say, "Oh, that's so far past in the past." And I don't say that to say that you're a slave owner or that your mom or dad was a slave owner or even that your grandfather was a slave owner. But my question is, does that actually play a part? Because I would say that my father lived through the civil rights era. My father, who's still alive, he can tell me the stories of the police dogs being let loose and eggs being thrown at him. And his father, who I knew, right, who I had a personal relationship with before he passed, who experienced the Jim Crow South in Alabama and who left the South because of the KKK and because of the oppression there, and moved to Dayton, Ohio to try to escape the Great Migration. And I have even on my person today a video or a cassette tape of his mother, who was born in the 1800s, who knew everything what it meant to be a black person whose family had been set free with nothing and no opportunity, and to be set free to a world that hated, that oppressed. Yeah. And that takes me right back to the same period that some people say, no, that's so far away, and that's not even relevant to the story. And I want to say it's absolutely 100% relevant to the story. If what Christ and the early church did in history is relevant to what we do today, then what happened to my father and his mother is relevant to what happens today. And you nailed it on the head. And it's post-traumatic stress syndrome. I've seen things as a pastor, which would be called secondary trauma, that I had to go get help for, that I had to go talk to somebody about, that I had to go process my feelings and my emotions over. And we have a nation full of people, and some have done very, very, very well. But there's a disparity of those who've not done so well and who don't have the resources to talk to somebody about it, and don't have the resources to get help and get counseling. And then they watch the video that we watched, and you express your emotions. Yeah. So how does that person feel? And is there any bearing on what has happened in the past that actually makes a difference to what happens today? But I think in the church, what we've really lost is our oneness. Yeah. What we really lost is the fact that we're one body. The Bible says the ear can't say to the eye or the nose, I don't need you. The stomach, though you don't see it, is even more necessary, the Bible says. And so sometimes it may be out of sight, it may be out of your proximity, but it's necessary. And I say we need each other. Yeah. I need your perspective, and you need mine. Exactly. And so this is a time and a space and place in history. I have a feeling the world is not going back. The world doesn't want to go back to normal, but I'm afraid that some church leaders just wish things would just quiet down and go back to normal. And so what's different for you? Why are you saying in this moment, I'm willing to put my neck out there, and I'm willing, if it means people misunderstanding me, and if it means someone twisting my words, I'm willing to take a step and say what I need to say?
Well, one thing I've always heard said is there's always something you see controlled by something you don't see. And so therefore, we're so quick to try to address somebody's behavior, but there's always a root to it. And so why did you do this? What is causing you to act this way? Why do you feel this way? Why do you say
what happened?
Yes. And so for me, I've made the mistake of saying, I just see people as people. I don't see color. And I was wrong for that. And my goal in saying that my intentions aren't wrong, but the truth is we do see color. And color is beautiful. Red and yellow, black and white. Like we learned when we were kids. Red and yellow, black and white. And so we do see color. And we talk about we don't want to be color blind. We want to be color blessed. And therefore, what's different for me now is just, really pausing and seeing the video. And this time it's like, wow, in that moment, maybe that was where God really allowed me to experience my own kind of tipping point, turning point, whatever you want to say. That it was just like, man, I've really got to stand up and do something. And I was nervous at other times to really stand up and because I don't want to, I'm always nervous to speak if I'm not as educated or fully understanding, because I don't want to cause any more hurt to a situation. But I want to be a part of the solution. Sometimes I don't know, but I'm willing. So it's like, reaching out to you going, tell me what we can do, and again, I know some folks may say, well, you need to look up and figure out what to do. And I can do that too, but if there's something that that I can do, I'm willing to come alongside you and help, springboard into action, something. So for me, it was just like, I'm tired of playing it safe. I don't want to arrive at death safely. I mean, if we're going to talk about heaven is so integrated, then why is the church so segregated? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're black, I'm white, dude, we're best friends. We sang together growing up. We preached it. We won't do that here. We preached together growing up. You know, we're going to be preaching at a youth event in July together, and all that stuff that way. So it's like, how can we bridge that gap to where we see the church start to become more integrated and not so segregated?
Yeah.
And if we talk about, you know, having a church that's diverse, but how can we make it have that diversity and be able to offer something for everybody to come together, and not just offering something for one set of individuals, but how can we do something as a whole? How can we truly start to bridge the gap and build these conversation pieces to bring people together? And I think that it can really start with you and I, you know, coming together to say, what can we do? Like, what would a church look like if we said, you know what, man, we're coming together to co-pastor something together. Even though it's at Huber Heights in Cincinnati, we do this together and we co-lead pastor together. And we start to bridge that gap. I mean, anything is possible.
Yeah. Change the story.
Yeah.
Change the narrative.
Yeah.
It's not about white church, black church. It's about the church.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about power. It's not about, well, we're bigger or this. No, it's just like, let's go get people. Let's go get people. And one thing I want to say that I think it's time that people who want to say something and want to help get the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. That we can have grace. Again, if I'm going to say let's follow the words of Christ, let's give grace, let's give the benefit of the doubt to where a brother who wants to do something and say something doesn't feel like, if I say I have to say it just the right way. Come on, that's nonsense, church. That's nonsense. Come on, let's give grace just like we want grace. Let's give grace in this area, and let's look past all of our own implicit biases and preconceived notions, and let's put up, if we're going to talk about supremacy, let's talk about the supremacy of Christ. Yeah. Let's talk about the supremacy of Scripture. And this is what I believe with all my heart. And there'll be some people who say I'm not woke. But I believe I have more in common with you who don't have the same color skin as me because of Jesus than I have in common with someone who has the same color skin as me who doesn't follow Jesus. Yeah. I believe because of Ephesians chapter 2 that the wall of hostility was broke down between Jew and Gentile. And as you said, the Jews were racist. Yeah. They were prejudiced. They were bigots. And if God can bring down the wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles, as we see there when Paul had to call out Peter for being two-faced, talking to the Jews or to the Gentiles in this moment, but then when the Jews didn't like it, he backpedaled, he walked it back. No, if the Bible can bring down that hostility, can't the Bible bring down the hostility we have? And can't Jesus make the difference? Don't we have more in common with Jesus? And can't we find that common place? So let's start being about it. Let's stop talking about it. Yeah. We're already comparing notes. Oh, yeah. We're already working behind the scenes. Let's make that public. Let's make that up front, that it's not about the color of your skin. It's about what Christ can do in this world. And I want to be the church. Yes. I believe this is our inheritance. I believe this is our calling to this generation. Because I'm going to be honest, Pastor Doug, and I want you just to give me some closing thoughts. Yeah. I think that people who put ideologies and political parties and they put worldly mindsets above the words of Christ, I think they're going to die wandering in the wilderness. I think this next generation is going to move past, and I wonder if the church is going to come into the promised land. Now, don't get me wrong. There's Caleb's and Joshua's. Yes. But I'm ready to move forward to what I believe is a changing moment in our culture, and I believe the church should lead the way. And I know that can be difficult, because I may have people in my church who want just to go back to the way things were, but I'm ready to move forward. Yeah. And I'm ready to stop talking about it. I'm ready to make some action.
You know when you say that, you know what you're asking for, right? Like we're praying through some big stuff of what could be in the future, right?
Well, if God is in it, I'm in it.
That's what I'm saying. And so I've heard somebody say, though, the harder you are to offend, the easier you are to bless. And so the church should be a a spot where there can be grace-filled conversations and forgiveness can be extended. And I've always said, well, what we don't drop, we will pass. Mm-hmm. Meaning, I want my boys to grow up in a whole different culture of how church is done. I want my boys to be able to hang out. We may have, our kids may get married, you know what I mean? Like, you know, my sons could be.
Hopefully they go to college and get a good job and all that kind of stuff. And maybe we could talk about it.
Okay, all right. We'll hold you to that one. But arranged marriages, let's bring that back. But, you know, for me, it's one of those things, and I use the analogy on Sunday in my sermon is when a check engine light, when a dash light comes on, you have to address the dash light in your car. You can't just put a piece of tape over it and expect it that it's fixed. Just because you want to cover it up doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Because what we don't confront now will confront us later, and it might show up in the form of our kids one day that we're not willing to handle what needs to be handled now. So we have to have that awareness in our hearts, and I believe that pastors, especially white pastors, have to be willing to share the stage and allow brothers like yourself to come in and share their stories to help their church gain perspective of what it truly means to be the church, of coming together. Stop worrying about like, what if this gets said, what if this gets said? It's going to be okay. Eat the fish, leave the bones, right? Like, you're not always going to agree with everything. Like, you know, I've always said, we're married, right? We don't always agree with our wives. We don't just leave them. You know, we continue to see how we can be better. How can we stop and have these conversations to say, you know, what's it like on the other side of me? How am I treating you? But then also, what's it like in your shoes? The reverse principle. How can I understand, you know, you better so that I can also be a better minister to more people? Because I don't want to be colorblind. I want to be color blessed. I want to have a piece of heaven down here on earth. And that means you're going to offend some people. And again, you might just offend the people that actually need to get away from you.
That's right.
Because you want to be able to have this multicultural, you know, you want to come together and really celebrate this diversity and bring people alongside you and say, man, let's go. We're better together than we are apart. I can go, you know, fast alone, but I can go further together. And so I need you to help me, and then vice versa, on how we can continue to be the church and bridge this gap and have the conversations and really be a part of things that need to change, that would be systemic. What needs to change? Let's do it, man. Let's make that push. Like, I'm down. I'm willing to stand and do whatever. I always say,
I like to
sorry, you know what I'm
snap
saying?
them,
Like, that's the Cuba Heights thing.
He's trying to show me up now.
Someone from Wayne just was like, took him back to high school. But what I'm saying to you is that, you know, my heart is to say, what needs to change? Let's go, man. I'm with you. I'm with you. And I think more folks need to stop always saying all lives matter and be able to say Black lives matter. Because for all lives to matter, Black lives have to matter.
Yeah.
And I'm okay to say that.
I'm glad. And here's why I think that's so important. And this is the last thing I have to say.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you listening to me and letting me get a little.
No, I love it, man.
Passionate.
I appreciate you teaching, man.
What has hurt my heart the most is when I sit down across from the table with those families and people who've experienced abuse in their homes. You know what I've seen with children who've been abused is that the children who've been abused, not only do they grow up with feelings towards the person who abused them, they also grow up despising the person who sat by silent and allowed it to happen. And I know you're a good pastor, and I know you love your people, and I just want to commend you that the people in your church who have a different skin color, you're not going to sit by silently, while we continue to see this abuse and we can continue to see this mistreatment just because you look different. And I just want to pray for you. I want to pray for the church, and I want to pray for our church. Our church, the capital C church, that we would walk forward in this moment and we would say, never again. Never again we're going to push this under the rug. Never again we're going to enable this violence without us standing up and crying out with those who are crying for justice.
And I'll say this before you pray. I appreciate the kind words. I'm humbled, but at the same time, I've dropped the ball as well. I haven't always done I haven't always spoken up when God said to speak up because I get nervous. And I got to be better. I got to continue to rise up. It's not enough. There's got to be more that we can do to help bridge this gap. And I want to be better all the way around. And so that's my prayer, is that I can be part of the solution and not contribute to the problem. Just because people want to ignore it, it's not going away.
It's not going anywhere.
And so, yeah, but I appreciate the words, and I love you, brother.
I pray. Father, I just thank you for the invitation and the conversation. I thank you that in this moment we could have understanding, and that understanding brings empathy. And Lord, I just pray, God, as our hands are locked together, as we lock in together, Lord, help us to lead together. Help us to lead out united, unified. Help us to cry out for justice, and may it flow like a mighty river. And Father, I pray, God, as we cry out, Lord, we point people back to you, the giver of life, the giver of love, the giver of law, the giver of this justice. And so, Father, I pray for engage, and I pray for revive. And I pray, God, our multi-ethnic churches would lead the way into these spaces where others are trying to hide and go back. Lord, we don't ever want to go back. Help us to never be the same. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 I love you, brother.
Love you, man.
I appreciate you, man.
Come on.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Oh, yes.
Man, thank you for the kicks.
Dude, you got it, man. You got it.
Love you, church.
Love you all. Last thing, man, we're going to be I want you to be praying. We got some big things that we're praying through, talking through, that could be absolute game changers, and could get a lot of positive attention to help bring some solution to the
Better together.
Yep. So however that looks, we want whatever God wants. So with that said, have a good day. We'll see you guys real soon.